Hey, what's up, everybody? This is an open discussion with C3 Films. My name is Chris, and this is.
Cheryl.
And today we're talking about the animated Netflix movie, The Witcher: Nightmare of the Wolf. So we are going to get into spoiler territory here. Most likely, if you've seen The Witcher season 1 and 2, you already kind of have an idea about what happens in this movie. But regardless, if you don't want to get spoiled, get on out of here. Go and watch the movie. It's short. It's like an hour and 20 minutes. Really good watch. You won't regret it. And then come back and listen to our discussion about it. But without further ado, let's jump right into it. So me and Cheryl, we watched this a second time for this show. The first time we watched it on our own just because we felt like watching it, and we didn't even watch it together, and we didn't talk about the fact that we were planning on watching it. It was just something we watched, and then we found out we enjoyed it separately. Um,
Well,
but
I
when
mean,
I
I
first
think
started,
we watched it because we really liked the live action series with Henry Cavill. So, I mean, I think we at that time we were probably both like, we want more Witcher stuff. Ooh, look at this.
right? And then also it's just we both like animation, so there's that too. So we checked this movie out. My knowledge going into this movie, because we watched it the first time we watched it, it was before season 2 of The Witcher was out, and I did not have as much knowledge about the history of The Witcher. So, and I've heard the name Vesemir, but I did not really know who Vesemir was. So this movie was like completely blind for me. I didn't know anything. I didn't even know that this was connected to the overall Witcher series until the last line of the movie where he says there will always be another monster, Geralt. And then I was like, because I didn't know that Vesemir was related to Geralt like that. So I lost my mind and then loved it when I saw Vesemir represented in The Witcher season 2, and then I found out that he's in the games as well. So it was a great experience.
That's funny. I had a guide, so I already knew that one of the kids was going to be Geralt because I was told who Vesemir was while I was watching this. So, also because I played a little bit of the game before I watched it, so I kind of already knew who he was. Um, but yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting. It was kind of cool because it still kind of went along with the theme of two different timelines. There's the past and then the present, and it's very much just an origin story of Vesemir and his life and like how he came to be a Witcher and
Aaron Morin.
Morin.
Yeah.
And how that place came to not came to be, but like what it was like before the Witchers became, I guess not extinct, but
Virtually.
endangered.
Yeah, it kind of details the whole siege of Kaer Morhen, but well, the thing that I thought was interesting, like there's a lot we can talk about, and I don't necessarily know the order of which we should jump into this, but I want to talk about real quick, like one of the things that stands out about this movie, even though it's like a simple premise, because the premise is basically witchers kill monsters. There are no more monsters because they're killing so many. Witchers need money, therefore witchers make monsters. But the there's a complexity to the characters that is very enjoyable in this movie, where you see that Daglin, the guy that takes Vesemir in and turns the boys into witchers, kind of like what Vesemir becomes for Geralt and the others later. He understands that not only do the witchers need money, but he also says to Vesemir near the end of the movie, if witchers did not have monsters, then men would hunt the Witchers, and it's the only thing keeping the Witchers safe. And the fact is that the Witchers were made by witches after the witches made monsters to kill the dwarves and the elves. So basically, the witches had to make witchers to fight the monsters that the witches created in the first place. So now you already have that dichotomy, but then you have the oh my gosh, I forget the woman's name that was the bow and arrow, but
Tetra.
she Tetra. So and Tetra, she went through some. She had a bad experience with the Witcher in the past, so she hates the Witchers. But at the same time, she suspects the Witchers for doing wrong at the beginning of the movie. She says we don't usually have these creatures in this area. The witches are up to something foul, and we're all like, "Oh no, no, you're wrong, you're wrong." But by the end of the movie, she ends up being right. So you have these characters where no one is actually wrong, but they're opposed to each other, and that's one of the things that I liked most about that movie.
Yeah, and it felt very relatable too, even though it's a fantasy world about like just how you could, or not you, but like some people can be very consumed by how they feel about one type of person and then stereotype them and then act on it aggressively, and that's definitely a problem. And I think this is one of the ways that just a story that really shows that, like you mentioned how not both sides are doing something wrong, but not everyone on either side is doing something wrong. And that's the problem that I think a lot of people don't really understand, is that there's, that one kid in class that always, makes things harder for everyone else. But, like when it comes down to it, everyone's the same, but everyone's different. And I think this movie did a pretty good job of showing that difference in people or difference in character.
Yeah, and it even allows for Vesemir as a character to grow in multiple ways. But one of the ways is when Daglin says a line that is very true. Once again, Daglin does some things that are wrong in the movie, but he's not always wrong with the things that he says. What he says to Vesemir is that you've never seen it because you're always looking down at their coin instead of up at their eyes. You don't see the fear and the hate that they have for us. And you're like, yeah, the one thing the movie makes sure that you know about Vesemir is that he only cares about money, even when he was a kid because he didn't have any. So he doesn't see what Daglin's talking about because he doesn't care. When he finds the kid at the beginning of the movie, he just sends the kid off, and it doesn't try to help the kid or anything because he only wants the money. So when you get to the end of the movie where you have this conflict between the Witchers, the witches, and the humans, Daglin's right. And Vesemir doesn't realize how wrong he's been. And if maybe Vesemir had opened his eyes a little sooner, maybe he could have done something or seen a way to like change the course of what's going on. Because Vesemir is a decent guy. They make sure you know that he does only care about money, but he will help people, and he does care about people. So I thought
Yeah.
that he's also complicated.
Yeah, and definitely, because I feel like even though I think his name is Delgan, 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 and Tetra are both doing what they believe is right, and they're not entirely wrong.
Nope.
But they're taking actions based on what they think is right. And I think Vesemir also does the same thing, but he has like a different story because his experience is like, I'm gonna do this so that I could do this for someone else. I could do this for Ileana, and then he ends up not not going the way that he, I guess, ideally wanted.
Yeah.
But that just kind of goes to say that you could be trying to do the right thing in the wrong way, and you're not gonna get what what you really wanted. So it's kind of like it's just hard to make the right choice, I guess, is something that we experience with all the characters in this movie.
Absolutely. And you brought up Ileana. I like the fact that so there's two things with Ileana, but the first thing I'll bring up is that Ileana is used to show the passage of time. So once again, you mentioned earlier how there's two timelines, but just like with the main Witcher series, we don't ever see anything that says like 20 years later, 30 years later, or anything else like that. The only inclination we get to how much time has passed is the moment we meet Ileana and find out who she is. Because the movie begins by showing us who she is, but she has a different name because she's been adopted into a different family. And so up until that point, we don't know how much time. And when we see the flashbacks with her as a kid with Vesemir, we don't know how much time has passed between then and the present time of the movie. But then when she comes out and reveals herself to Vesemir and she says her name and you see that she's old, you realize just how much time has passed. And I think that that's a very cool moment because it functions as a reveal of these characters meeting each other for the first time again, but it also shows that Vesemir doesn't age the same way as other people if you're unfamiliar with how Witcher physiology works. And then it also shows that a lot of time has passed because Ilyana, who we saw as a kid, is now an old lady.
Yeah. My favorite line of the movie is, I'm a 70-year-old woman, and Vesemir's like, or like, no, she says something like, I'm 70 years old, and he was like, so am I. And I'm like, oh, that's
Yeah.
so cute.
And now that you brought that up, we got to talk about it. I love the love story in this movie, even though it doesn't have the happy ending that I'd want. I love the love story in this movie.
Oh, you know, I loved how it ended.
Of course you did.
How dark was that? That he was actually the one that accidentally killed her because illusions being a big thing, um, a big, I guess, tool that they use in this movie. And so he doesn't know that he's in an illusion, even though that's what Tetra's all about. And he
Kitsu's the illusionist.
oh Kitsu but yeah, but Kitsu was part of the what do you calls it, the team, because Kitsu gets together with Tetra to wipe out the Witchers. She lies to Kitsu, and that's how she gets Kitsu on her side, and then yep,
Yeah,
that was a dark turn. I was like, no.
yeah, and the first time I saw that fight, oh my god, there's so much with this movie. But like the first time I saw that fight, I was blown away. There's a lot of really cool animated fights, and this is done by Studio Mir. So these are the people that did Boondocks. They're the people who did The Legend of Korra. They're really good at animation, and when you see the fights, like there's even a moment that looks taken straight out of Korra, the like from Avatar: Last Airbender or whatever, because he does like this wind blast and she literally turns and like takes it from him and shucks it back at him, and I'm just like, you guys reused animation from Korra for that one. But it's amazing, and like one of the cool things about animation is that you can have these really elaborate, bombastic fights that would be a whole lot harder to pull off with live action. People are faster than they would be in real life. You have this cool portal battle. Like, one of the cool things about that fight is that it's literally a ranged fighter versus a close range melee fighter, and they are figuring out how that works. Because normally it'd be if the moment the meleeer gets close, the ranged fighter is dead, but Tetra is using portals and with bow and arrows and magic, and it's just so much fun. And the ending with the stab and it's great. It's a great reveal moment when you realize that it's not who you thought it was, but at the same time, when you first think he wins by losing an arm and then cutting off her head, that felt like a good ending. But then they take it further when he tries to kill Kitsu and it ends up being Ilyana.
Yeah, and you know, I one of my favorite scenes, or like, you know, combat scenes in the movie is actually when he's in the air fighting those like griffins.
Yes.
And like he spends so much time in the air and he takes out like 3 of them on his way down. Like, that was cool. That was pretty elaborate. And you know, like yeah, because I already watched the movie, so I sort of left it on in the background while I was doing other things. And there was like a good amount of time where like no one was really saying anything, and I was like, oh, I think I need to watch this part because this is the part where all the cool stuff is happening. It's like the visual part of the movie, where all, you know, just
Yeah.
some good animation there.
Yeah, and it's funny you
Not
say
for
that.
kids.
No, absolutely not for kids. And I did what you did. I had it on in the background while I was doing some work, and then once it got to like the last 30 minutes of the movie, I found myself looking up at the TV a little bit more, and then before I knew it, I was just watching the end of the movie, just all over
Yeah.
again.
I had to rewind it. It was like, I need to actually watch this part because this is the best part.
Like the story, like we said, is simple, but like the revelations and how they come is pretty good. When you're hearing how Tetra is talking about how a Witcher swindled somebody, and Vesemir talking about, oh, that's a good idea, and Tetra being like, yeah, you're proving my point about you as a human being. But then when they get to the point where Kitsu is, and you discover what's happening to Kitsu, where she has been combined with another creature, a mall, I think it was what it was called. But when she looks at the way the alchemy, she understands that the alchemy that's used is the same alchemy to make witchers, which means that a witcher must be behind this. And so Vesemir doesn't know, but all of a sudden, like even Philandriel is like, "Hey, did you do this?" And so like there's this great moment where Vesemir puts it together, and if you've been paying attention to the audience, you've also put it together that it was Delgan, and it's a great moment. And then they have literally another elf that's just like Kitsu, because Kitsu's basically trying to make other people like her, because someone had to make it. So and Delgan did this to her first, but it's one of those things of like, hey, this person's really powerful. They're dangerous. We already know what Kitsu's done. We should probably kill her, and they let her go. But even then, you understand all sides, because if this thing is dangerous, she could murder a whole more people in the future, and at the same time, enough people have died. The elves have already lost. It's complicated. I think that's what's so good. I think that's one thing that the Witcher does consistently on video games or television show. Is It does that very well. The complications.
Yeah, and I didn't really when the first time I watched it, I didn't really have a very good background of the history of the elves and what was going on with that. So I was very confused the first time I watched it. Um,
Same.
but I think that's like one of the nice things about The Witcher actually. I mean, I guess it could be a good thing or a bad thing, but for a lot of The Witcher stuff, it's just more fun to watch it a second time, I think, because you have more information and you're like, oh, I get this detail, and then you can really just see how clever the writing is. Although it's just could be because of how complicated it is, it's a little hard to follow sometimes. There's just a lot of lore and like backstory. But I feel like because of that, it makes the world very rich because of how complicated everything is and how detailed everything is.
Yeah, I like the consistency, and like you said, like I felt like I enjoyed this movie more the second time than I did the first time, and I think it was really owed to the fact that I understood more of the references. Like things they were saying didn't just come off as noise to me. I actually legitimately understood what they were saying. When she brings up chaos, I know what she's talking about because I had the recent refresher of what chaos was and how chaos is referring to like the magic and fire and stuff like that. He even says, I thought that fire was forbidden for mages like you, which is exactly what we hear about with Yennefer. And, they say tap into your chaos at the end of season one. So there's all this lore that you hear about in other ways. Like you might hear it through The Witcher season one, Witcher season two, or you might hear it through this. But taken separately, it might not seem like much, but when you put it together, it's a straight line. It's consistent. They don't break their own rules, even though these are different mediums. And I'm almost positive if I was to play the games, it would be the same way. So I like the fact that even though we're experiencing this story, this world through different mediums, they're not breaking their lore or breaking their consistency, at least so far as what we've experienced.
Yeah, and I was kind of looking a little bit into it in terms of how close this was to the books. And I actually read that it it didn't actually come from the books. They actually made all of this up, where it was just these things, these events were only mentioned, but
Okay.
there was no like whole detailed explanation of all this stuff happening. So it's kind of like, oh, there's a blank spot here, let's fill it in and make it into an animation. And I think that's really impressive that they were able to do that and make it like literally fit into the series, because it really does fit between season 1 and season 2 of The Witcher. It's
I
like,
mean,
even though it all happens before season 1 of The
mhm.
Witcher, it's almost like you need to have seen season one to understand this movie, and then this movie prepares you to understand the second season.
Yeah, I mean, wow. I didn't know that, and that just makes me like this movie even more. It reminds me like what Star Wars did with the Clone Wars, and how the Clone Wars just kind of fit in between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Like to see this and to understand that it was not from a book first, but yet it feels so complete for the lore and what happens, especially because it's referenced and the motivations and the world. Like I'm very much impressed, and I wasn't even aware that this was something that was a thing. Like I just happened to come about it on Netflix randomly, and I was like, yeah, I like The Witch and I like animation. Let's just watch it. But this wasn't something that I even knew about. Like I'm not even sure how long it was out before I eventually watched it.
Yeah, me too. It was just very like I had just finished watching the first season of The Witcher, and I was like so gun ho about it. I really wanted more Witcher stuff, and so I ended up watching the animation, and I I didn't know how well it was gonna fit in um, even before I watched season two. Now that I've watched it again after watching season two, I feel like I appreciate it more than I did the first time. And again, like I think that might not be the greatest thing because of how specific it is, and how it doesn't fit a wide audience, and I think that's probably not a great thing, because I kind of feel like that about The Witcher in general as well, because it was very complicated. Season one was very complicated, and like very hard to follow, I guess you could say. It's not for everyone. It's something that you really have to pay attention to a lot. And I think that's very consistent with all of the Witcher content in general, but it may not necessarily be a good thing because of the limited audience, target audience.
Right. No, that's a fair point, but I do believe that the the show in the world can find its audience. I really feel like the video game was kind of like that too. When The Witcher came out, like The Witcher had been coming out for years before I ever heard of it. Like by the time The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt came out, like I didn't even realize there was a Witcher 1 and 2. And so and anytime anyone really talks about The Witcher, they mainly talk about The Witcher 3 as far as video games go. So I really feel like even in the video game world, The Witcher kind of went under the radar. So it's kind of interesting that in television, it's kind of having that same kind of journey. But I wonder because nowadays, most people, when they talk about The Witcher, they're mainly talking about Witcher 3 and talking about it with high praise. I wonder if, like, after a couple of seasons, people will look back on The Witcher television show and even just The Witcher as a series and look upon it a little differently than just the people who were the few that seemed to really been following it from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of crazy, just like in general, to know that it started as a book and then it became a video game and then it became a series. And I don't
Right.
think that happens all too often. Usually it's a book and a
Right.
movie, or a book and a movie and then a game. But never have I heard it be a book and then a game and then a movie. So I think that's
Right.
a very interesting turn of events.
Absolutely. Do you think that you would want to see more Witcher animations, or do you kind of feel like you wanted to see more of the live action stuff?
I feel like it's fine either way, because I don't really think what is doing it for me are the actors or the visual effects. It really is a story, and just all of that in general. So it could be either way, and I would still enjoy watching it. I guess I feel like a live action is a little bit harder to mess up, um, because it's more difficult to make. I guess it's harder to fix stuff when you do stuff in live action, as opposed to animation. So I feel like you would be able to fine tune a story more if you were doing an animation.
Sure.
But otherwise, it doesn't matter to me.
I agree, and I think my answer for that is that I would love to see both. I love the show. I love this movie, and I anytime I can really get a good story accompanied by really brilliant fight choreography, whether it's live action or an animation, I'm all for it. And I specifically love seeing animation where you can have characters move in a way that they can't move in real life. So it's just like that fantastical aspect of it. I'm always for as well. So I think at the end of the day, I just really want to experience more of the Witcher world. Um, they've got me. I'm hooked. I might play the video game sometime this year. But yeah, this movie really, like when I first watched it, I liked it, but after watching it a second time, I love it.
Yeah, definitely. And the last thing I want to mention is the music and how like they basically brought it the music and really connected it like it, and I think that's the other thing that makes me feel like it's so connected to the live action series is because of the music. It's very very similar. It's not the same. It's similar. And I think that's what also makes it so good, like the way that they scored it, because it had the same level of intensity and memorability as the series, the live action series, and it's consistent. So it really feels like the music brought everything together, in terms of keeping this animated movie within the same fantasy world as the live action series.
Yeah, everything always feels very consistent. And at some point, I'm going to have you listen to the Witcher soundtrack from the game just so you can hear. But yeah, they definitely found a tone for like what they want to hear as far as score goes, and they're sticking with it. They're not doing the same thing, like you said. It's still different, but if you hear it, and like let's say if you're walking down the street and you randomly heard like something like being played, you might not know for sure, but you might ask yourself, "Huh, I wonder if that's from The Witcher." And you'd probably be well, you probably would be right. And that's the cool thing about it is just that it is recognizable, but it's not like the Star Wars theme or anything else like that. It's not something that is carried from across all mediums, but it is a feeling, and they evoke that feeling no matter what medium they're working in.
Exactly. It's not like a tune that you remember. It's a sound. It's the vibe. It's the feeling. It's the
Vibe.
instrument that is being used that is signature Witcher. And like you said, from like anything you'd be like that right there is the world of Witcher music.
Yep. Absolutely. So, yeah, that's what we thought about The Witcher: Nightmare of the Wolf. Like, what did you guys think about it? Did you see it? Did you like it? Do you love animation? Did you see Legend of Korra? Do you see the other things that Studio Mir has done? And like, were you impressed by this, or do you think that we're blowing it out of proportion and it was just all right? Whatever you thought about it, comment below. Let us know. And while you're down there, give us a like, share, and subscribe. Even if you don't, though, I have been Chris, and this has been
Cheryl, and we'll see you all next time.